In 1953, a British clerk signed a payment on a loan taken out to fight the First World War. He was not the first to sign it. He was not the last. Britain made its final payment on that debt in 2015, 97 years after the war ended. The men who borrowed the money were dead. The men who fought the war were dead. The debt was not. That is not a story about war. It is a story about a machine built 5,000 years ago in a temple by priests, a machine nobody has ever switched off. Nobody in this video pays it back. I want you to know that now. Watch for something else. Watch for the moment each of them realizes it and borrows anyway. Southern Mesopotamia, the city of Uruk, more than 5,000 years ago. The oldest writing humans have ever found is not poetry. It is not scripture. It is accounting. Clay tablets recording quantities of grain and who owed them. Writing was invented to track debt. Here is how it worked. A farmer brings grain to the temple at harvest, when grain is everywhere and worth almost nothing. The temple stores it. Winter comes. His family is hungry. He goes back and borrows grain from the same storehouse he filled. He owed more grain than he borrowed. The difference had a name. We call it interest. They wrote it using a word that also meant calf. Because a herd grows on its own, grain in a storehouse does not. But the number attached to it did. And the lender was not a man, it was the temple. The temple was the god. You did not default on a merchant. You defaulted on the deity who owned the city, the harvest, and the rain. The first credit rating in human history was theological. Interest on silver ran around 20%. On grain, higher. And when the grain ran out, the collateral was not land. It was people. Your wife, your children, yourself. Which raises a question the priest could not answer for long. What happens to a city when the math takes everyone? Around 1754 BC, a Babylonian king writes the rules down. You know the name, Hammurabi. You probably learned it in a classroom, and what you kept was eye for an eye, which is the least interesting thing in the document. The interesting part is Law 117. If a man hands over his wife, his son, or his daughter to work off a debt, they serve 3 years. In the 4th year, they go free. Read that again. The most famous law code of the ancient world puts an expiration date on debt. It does that because the alternative was collapse. When too much of the population is working off what they owe, nobody farms their own land and nobody fights in the army. So Mesopotamian kings did something no modern government could survive doing. On taking the throne, or in a crisis, they declared a general cancellation. Debts void, bondservants home, land returned to the family that lost it. They called it a return to the mother, a clean slate. Here is the part that should stop you. They did not do it out of mercy. They did it out of arithmetic. They had noticed that compound interest grows faster than crops do, and that eventually the debt exceeds everything that physically exists. We kept the compound interest. We deleted the reset. 3,000 years later, Venice is at war and out of money. So Venice does something new. Instead of borrowing from a banker, it borrows from its own citizens. It issues paper. The paper promises a share of future tax revenue with interest. Citizens buy it. Venice fights its wars. That is the birth of the government bond, and it changes everything. Because now the people who own the debt and the people whose taxes service the debt are the same people. Which means the state never has to settle. It can roll the paper over, issue new bonds to pay old ones, forever. As long as one thing holds, that tomorrow's revenue is bigger than today's. Venice owed more than it borrowed and found that it did not matter, so long as it kept growing. Every government since has assumed the same thing. It is the load-bearing assumption of the modern world. Spain in the 1500s is the richest power on earth. Silver from the Americas is arriving by the fleet. Philip II defaults in 1557, then 1560, then 1575, then 1596. 4 defaults, 1 king. While silver is physically pouring into the country, the silver did not save Spain, it destroyed Spain. Because silver made Spain creditworthy, bankers in Genoa looked at the incoming treasure fleets and lent against them. Spain borrowed against silver that had not been mined yet, from mines it had not found yet, and spent it on wars. Collateral does not make you rich, it makes you borrowable. No army defeated Spain, a payment schedule did. The United States is born insolvent. The revolution was fought on borrowed money. Alexander Hamilton's move in 1790 was not to pay it off. It was to absorb it. The federal government takes on the state's war debts, consolidates them, and commits to servicing them reliably, forever. His reasoning is in his own reports. A national debt, if it is not excessive, is a national blessing. Not because debt is good, because a debt paid reliably creates a permanent class of people who need the government to survive. Hamilton turned creditors into stakeholders, and it worked. That is the uncomfortable part. American credit went from worthless to excellent inside a decade, and every government on earth copied it. Debt stopped being a failure. It became infrastructure, and you do not remove infrastructure. Bretton Woods. 44 nations agree on the plumbing of the post-war world. Other currencies peg to the dollar. The dollar pegs to gold at $35 an ounce. There is a physical thing at the bottom of the pile, and every promise chains back to it. For 27 years, that holds. Then America spends heavily on war and domestic programs at the same time. Dollars pile up overseas, far beyond the gold behind them, and countries start doing the obvious thing. France sends ships for its gold. August 15, 1971. Nixon closes the gold window. The dollar is no longer convertible. He calls it temporary. It has been temporary for over 50 years. Understand what actually changed. Not that money became fake, that the ceiling came off. Under gold, credit was tethered to metal in vaults. After 1971, the only limit on how much debt could exist was how much debt people would agree to hold. The reset was already gone. Now the ceiling was gone too. Through the 1970s, developing countries borrow enormously, in dollars, at low rates. Then in 1979, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to break American inflation. They reach roughly 20%. Nobody in Mexico City voted for that. Nobody in Lagos or Manila was asked. But every loan written in dollars just repriced. August 1982, Mexico announces it cannot make its payments. Within a year, dozens of countries are in the same position. Here is the mechanism, and it is the most important sentence in this video. A country that borrows in its own currency has options. It can inflate. It can devalue. A country that borrows in someone else's currency has none of them. It can only obey. They owed more than they borrowed, and the size of the more was decided in a building in Washington. By 2008, the object at the center of the system is unrecognizable. A promise from one household gets bundled, sliced, insured, and resold until nobody can find the house. When it broke, the debt was not cleared. It was absorbed upward onto public balance sheets, onto the same instrument Venice invented. Not because anyone was cruel, because by then the machine was load-bearing. Global debt now runs past $300 trillion. American federal debt is past $36 trillion. Japan owes more than twice its entire economy and has not collapsed, which tells you the number was never the mechanism. The mechanism is the one from Uruk. You owe more than you borrowed, and the difference has to come from growth. Look at where debt sits in an ordinary life now. You cannot buy a house without it. You often cannot get a degree without it. A record of debt handled well decides the apartment you can rent. Being debt-free is not the top of the ladder. It is invisibility. And there is no exit because the exit is the thing everyone fears. If every debt were settled tomorrow, the assets on the other side would go to zero in the same instant. The pensions, the bonds, the retirement accounts. Your debt is somebody's savings. Always. The two numbers are the same number, seen from opposite sides. So it will not be paid, it will be rolled. Inflation will shave pieces off it quietly, and the loop runs again. The priests were right about one thing. Nobody ever escaped it. They just found someone else to owe.